the next sunrise sectors. We'll be talking about the technologies and innovations coming down the line, asking if they can really transform our future. There's quite a lot of excitement about a number of them. We've all heard about carbon drawdown to reverse the climate crisis, fermented bacteria to feed our futures, plastic munching enzymes to destroy waste, and in amongst it, of course, the algorithms, which will either be the salvation of civilization as we know it, or its death knell, according to the two sort of polarized views that are often expressed around AI. Of course, innovations aren't just about shiny technology. They're also about behavior change, nudged or otherwise by legislation or persuasion. That can have a huge impact in shifting how people do things. Just think how often nowadays you see someone going, compared to it being absolutely standard 30, 40 years ago. I should say for the online audience, I was doing a very bad impersonation of somebody smoking a cigarette. The question is, what does this all mean for business? For organizations who are trying to drive purposeful change, for decisions around investments, decisions around growth strategies, etc., etc. This is what we're going to find out from these guys. We have a great panel, which will be getting their collective teeth into it. Introducing them on my right, first of all, Richard James McCowan, who's an award-winning industrial designer. He's founder of Biomimicry Innovation Lab. He's working on ecological engineering solutions in the UK and abroad, including in India and Madagascar. And he describes himself as a biofuturist, and I will let him tell us what that means in a minute. Then, moving along, the environmental impact of pet food is not to be sniffed at, but it's also an opportunity for alternatives. The alternatives being addressed by our Global Good Award winner here, Conal Cunningham, who served time in the Royal Marines, first spotted the potential of insect protein when traveling in Africa, and he's brought that experience back home to Devon, where he set up Mr. Bug, which produced dog treats from insects on a farm in Devon. Moving along, we have Sophie Drez, who's a comms and marketing expert. She's worked for Microsoft, she's worked for Deloitte. She's now Chief Communication Officer at Neustark, which is a Swiss-based climate tech firm, right at the forefront of one of those innovations I talked about that people get really excited about, in this case, capturing CO2 and storing it permanently in concrete. Matt Sexton is Chief Transformation Officer at the renowned change agency Futera. We heard from their founder, Solitaire, this morning. Matt works with all sorts of people, from Formula One to Google to Pernod Ricard. He also runs Futera's new training academy, and before joining Futera, he was sustainability director at B&Q, where he led on the net positive strategy, which was really quite groundbreaking in its day. And finally, last but not least, we have Trewin Restorick, who's done more than most to shift attitudes and behavior around sustainability. Trewin's career is a roll call of creating influential organizations. All of them I think you've heard of, starting off with Paper Round, Global Action Plan, Hubbub, and now Sizzle, which is set up to help people lead greener lifestyles, presumably on the basis of selling the sizzle, not just the sausage, or if you want to sell the sausage, sell the sizzle, or something along those lines. Trewin has run a shed-load of awards, including Business Green's Lifetime Achievement Award, and above all, he's won a Global Good Award. So, this is a fascinating panel. I'm going to ask you each to kick off with a few opening remarks, and then we'll ask a few questions up here and throw it open to you guys. So, as you think of questions you'd like to ask them as they're speaking, do fire up your Slidos and start putting them up on Slido, and then we'll see them on the screen here. So, Richard, let me start with you. Biofuturist, what's that?
Only you can't turn a microphone.
Ah, well,
is that it working now?
There you are. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I can't also
change a plug, but that's another issue. Who can these days? Yeah, I find my work very much delving into where the potential is going to happen. So it's looking at where the fundamental research is happening in universities. So you start seeing, say, there's a lot of research around spiders or silk. And from that, once the academics are able to understand more about it, then they can take those principles into making new materials or into manufacturing processes. So you start seeing these collaborations happening if it happen in one lab. So example, in that one, you've got the Oxford Silk Group, who've had 3 or 4 spin-outs. Looking at manufacturing, there's a company called Spintex and a few other ones as well. So this is where you kind of see the future potential coming. Then investors are getting more and more understanding of these materials as well. And once they actually, the students actually, or the academics get more, they work more with marketing people as well. So they may go through kind of accelerator programs. So that's where I'm seeing it. One of the big areas that we found in previous research, especially in the UK, is into new materials. So whether it's companies like Notpla, coming from, Royal College of Art, who are doing amazing work. There's the 2 co-founders, a great double act as well. I think they both got the suits made at the same shop. But yeah, they're really pushing forward, and they're doing smart. I remember speaking to them a number of years ago, and they didn't want to break into America because that's one of the things. And it goes back to when I used to work in property, insolvency, that you don't want to grow too big. So you have your proving ground. They've done a lot of very interesting events, from working with Lucozade London Marathon into various other things. It's that slowly developing and making sure they can keep up with it. Because the great thing that Notpad did, and a lot of these other companies in biomimicry, is actually not just coming up with a new pill, but how do you manufacture it as well? And that's the crucial thing of actually seeing how does this fit into the industry's, entire process across their supply chain, and not just coming up with something that then it's too difficult to actually manufacture. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing a massive increase of stuff of materials designed by AI, which I think is, but that can be part of the future discussions actually. Mm-hmm.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks.
Go on.
Okay. Hello there. I'm from Mr. Bug. We are a protein farmer. Well, we are protein farmers. And the protein we create is it's hypoallergenic. It's full of amino acids and all the minerals you need for a healthy diet. It can be dried out, turned into a powder, kept for 1.5 years without refrigeration, has the same content or percentage as chicken protein, but it can be used in any type of food, anywhere, and feed. Which is pretty amazing in itself. And then the protein itself is made in vertical farms, which is insulated from climate change, and it uses hardly any resources. So 1/3 of the land, a third of the water, 1/10 of the land, and of course has hardly any emissions. So that, for instance, there's no methane. In addition to that, we have a byproduct called frass, which is manure really. And that is an incredible fertilizer that we're finding now through some of the studies that we're doing, can be used to make crops impervious or resistant to flood and to pests. So it's an amazing protein, and you really should wonder, why aren't we doing more of this? And just a bit about our journey. We only started about 2.5 years ago. This is a lockdown project that got slightly out of hand. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Paul, and we started off with a box in his kitchen. We decided to do mealworms, just to go back to that. And the reason why we decided to do mealworms is they don't fly. There's no containment issues. So we can vertically farm them. We can stack them up, and that seemed like a really nice, cheap way of starting a business, and also a really great way for us an easy way for us to scale up. And we started with a box in his kitchen, and then we moved to a test site. And from there, we bit the bullet and moved to a small commercial site. We built that. And then a DEFRA-approved processing site. And then from there, we created a product and released that to market. And we've really got an amazing team working with us now. Paul and I didn't really know what we were doing when we first started, but we met a wonderful lady, Dr. Gia, I can never pronounce her name. She's Icelandic. She's lovely. Aradottir. And she's an entomologist, and she basically gave us the science behind what we're doing. and she was instrumental in writing the application for the Innovate grant that we were successful at acquiring, which has helped us now work with the University of West England and their AI and robotics department to find automation to help us scale up our facilities. And also, we now employ Dr. Adam Bent, he's an research entomologist, and he is looking into feeds, different feeds for mealworms, basically to see what the effects are on the protein so that we can diversify. We decided to go into the pet market, first of all, really because we didn't think the consumer market was ready for us, the human consumer market. And the pet market we found is very embracing of new ideas. And so we started off with a dog treat, bug bites. Very natural, dry little treat with using mealworm protein as the protein base. And we were always very concerned, of course, about the yuck factor. You know, insect protein, despite the fact that 80% of the world eats insects and the other 20% eat it without knowing it, is besides the point. So we did the treat, we got into the pet market, and we were very concerned about what was going to happen, the reaction. But when we did these consumer shows, we had people, the moment they see Mr. Bug, they come up to us and they tell us about the benefits of insect protein, how it's really improved the health of their dog. And this is no small part because of vets now recommending insect protein, especially for dogs with allergies or dietary complaints. So it's really top-notch, very healthy protein. But of course, we're not going to do global domination with dog treats. And this is really a proof of concept. And we're in the process now of finding funding to move to the next step, which is to create a full range food, dog food. But we see other market potential after that. So I suppose we really hope that you will be seeing more of us in the future ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. Sophie, over to you.
Also, microphone test. Oh, it worked. I didn't shout like you, at least. No. So good afternoon, everyone. I think this is a very broad panel here, but I'm loving already hearing what I'm hearing. So we have, someone that's really taking the emerging themes and moving them forward and seeing if and how they can be commercialized. And we have next to me also someone who's in the food market, which is for sure a huge market where we can reduce our emissions. And where I work at, now excuse me, we haven't found the right pronunciation of our name yet in English. Neustark, Neustark, in German it's Neustark, of course, with the nice K at the end. We remove carbon from the air. And that's really at the core of what we do, and it's the purpose of what we do. We all know that we have to reduce the global warming to about 1.5 degrees by 2050 to mitigate severe consequences on the population and our planet. And we have to reduce emissions as much as we can. And when I say we, it's individually, it's companies, it's governments. It has been found, though, that we cannot only reduce. We will not get to net zero by 2050 if we only reduce. We also have to remove. So literally suck the CO2 that has been historically put into the air and that will continue to be put in the air because there are some industries where you just cannot avoid CO2 emissions. So we have to have that negative effect. So carbon removal. What we do at Neustark is we capture the CO2 at biogas plants where the CO2 is actually a byproduct of the biogas. And since it stems from biogas plants, that's a carbon neutral process already. So when we then take this CO2 and then we store it via our technology, it creates negative emissions. How do we store it? Something that actually came out of also a lab that concrete naturally stores CO2. I did not know that before I joined the company, but it's a process that takes thousands of years. And when concrete comes in contact with water, the CO2 mineralizes into the concrete. That means it's bound to the pores in the surface of the stone. It turns into limestone. So what we've done is created a technology where we can take this natural process that takes thousands of years and accelerate it to a couple of hours. And that way we create carbon removal, and we're actually one of the first players worldwide that's removing carbon already. It's a very nascent industry. There are a lot of players with a lot of great ideas. Some will succeed, some will fail, but we need a lot of investments, a strong ecosystem to drive this industry forward. And that's why we're also here talking about those kind of things, because we truly believe that we're stronger together. We need partners to build up the carbon removal industry. We need investment to come in from privately, from governments, and we need good ideas at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you. Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to warn you, I want a little bit of audience interaction in a minute. But my name is Matt Sexton. I'm Chief Transformation Officer for Futerra. In terms of getting ready for this session today, I was going to talk about the benefits of insect protein, and then I saw I had a leader on that, so I had to shelve that one. And then I was going to talk about carbon removal, and then I saw I had a leader on that, so I had to shelve that one as well, but I have smuggled it in. But what I am going to talk about is some slightly oblique stuff. But I have a question. It's only going to be a show of hands. How many people in this room, now be honest, own a pair of Crocs? Anybody going to be brave enough? 2, 3. There's more of you than that.
Okay,
right.
For the benefit of our online audience, that's about 5 out of 50 or so.
I think market share statistics will tell me otherwise, but we'll settle on 5. So, second piece of audience interaction. Who likes dairy-based ice cream? That's a lot bigger number for the benefit of the online audience. Okay, this one is going to be my tumbleweed moment. Who likes Formula One? Oh, wow. Okay, there we go. More guilty secreters amongst us. So the reason why I raise those 3 things is that Futerra, we have typically worked with our clients over the years to really set bold and ambitious targets, but very much within the sort of usual paradigm where we push people to set ever bigger targets. But actually, as I look around, I'm starting to think that we're not going to get to where we need to be without some more radical solutions. Because in reality, when we look at transport, yes, EVs are coming, but there's 1.5 billion internal combustion engine cars on the road. And even in America, there's going to be 20 million more of them by 2030. So we've got that to deal with. We've also got the challenge around fashion, which is that although there are Depop and there are e-commerce platforms and things, the reality is the numbers are just going up and up and up and up. You know, the fast fashion market is going to grow by something like 5% per annum between now and 2030. And when we come to meat and dairy, again, that, you know, there are really bold pioneers like Oatly out there who are doing a great job, but the reality is, again, consumption is set to go up. So we need to keep going with that work. We also need Triwin to make sure that everybody changes their behaviours. But we do think that actually we do need these new horizons. So the 3 I've got for you are what I call, I guess, heretical horizons, because what I find is when I raise them, they seem to sort of excite and enrage in equal measure. And they're to do with 3 clients that we've worked with. So the first one is actually Formula One. So I am a massive Formula One fan. We work with them largely because I wanted to preserve the sport I love. And we managed to get them to commit to a net zero target. And the cars in Formula One only account for a tiny percentage of the footprint, but the technology they're working on, synthetic fuels using direct air carbon capture, is phenomenal. And the heretical horizon here is that if we can't get everybody to switch to EVs in the next 10 or 15 years, which I don't think we're going to for a variety of reasons, if we can develop a competitively priced drop-in synthetic fuel that can flood into the tank of every car and plane and truck on Earth, then we might see decarbonisation happening at a far faster scale than we ever envisaged. The future is electric, but this could get us a long way in a short time. So there you go. Continuing with combustion, bit of a heresy, but I think it is a new horizon, which is really interesting. The second one is precision fermentation. Martin, you mentioned that at the beginning. We do a lot of work in farming and in dairy. And the reality is that there is a massive and growing market in oat milk, but equally, a lot of people still want the genuine taste of milk and don't want to move away from it. Precision fermentation, as far as we understand it, is a means of producing something which is molecularly very similar or identical to milk, same flavor. You can also make palm oil out of it, various other things, with a fraction of the land footprint and a fraction of the carbon footprint. And and we may look forward to a future in which we can give more space back to land through using precision fermentation. And the third one, the one about the Crocs, I want to stress this is not what Crocs are going to do, but it's what I think they should do. Crocs make their shoes out of a material called Croslite. And they've actually set a really ambitious target to reduce the carbon footprint of their shoes by increasingly building in carbon negative. I think they're bio-based, but actually, hey, they can make them out of DAC as well, material. And this is around this idea that consuming large amounts of clothing and objects at pace, I suspect, is going to continue for quite some time. If every one of them becomes a carbon sink and then we include every one of them in a closed loop, then we might be able to start a massive piece of drawdown from at scale, and one with a commercial driver, which is buying more stuff. So there you go, 3 horizons: precision fermentation, synthetic fuels, carbon negative materials. They do either excite or enrage, but I have a feeling they're going to be part of the picture. But hopefully not, because Trewin's going to tell everybody how to change their behaviour and we won't need them.
You're away, Trewin.
What an introduction. I've worked out I'm this conference's utility player, that they basically kept moving me from panel to panel, obviously where they're a bit short. I ended up with the panel which I had least direct experience with. So that's my sort of caveat before I start. But I think the first thing to say is that around horizon scanning is that we've simply got to change. We cannot keep doing what we're doing at the moment. So this isn't about an opportunity, it's about a necessity. We have to change to hit the targets that we need to reach. And I'll just give you a quick example of this. I found out the other day that Paris next week is holding an emergency planning meeting to see what Paris would have to do if temperatures in Paris hit 50 degrees C. Can you imagine that? If the temperature in Paris is 50 degrees C, they're talking to the fire service, they're talking to the health service, they're talking to the transport services, they're talking across the whole piece about what is the implication of that city hitting that temperature. And I think that gives a very quick snapshot of the scale of potential change that we could face, and the fact it's got to hit every single sector. You know, we cannot continue to do things as we are. And if only the leaders in the UK had similar foresight to start preparing us for what we've already put into the atmosphere. So this isn't an opportunity, it's a necessity. It's clearly going to hit food systems, it's going to hit water systems, and it's going to hit energy. And I think those are the areas that we're probably seeing as the areas where there's most interest in innovation. So how do you create innovation? How do you create these new horizons? And I think what we're not short of is brilliant ideas and brilliant tech. But if you look at the failure rate of those new ideas, it's incredibly high. So how do you give them every possible chance to succeeding? And I think the first thing you need to do is you need to think about collaboration, because we're talking about systemic change, and one small startup on its own can't really do it. So an example I've had from my work at Hubbub was we found this amazing company of scientists called Ellipsis Earth. They'd created drones and AI where they could map litter across an area, and they could tell you that's a piece of McDonald's litter, that's a piece of KFC, whoever. They could map it, but they couldn't get anybody to use their technology to look at waste management systems. So we brought them together with McDonald's and with a local authority, and basically through those partnerships, they were able to prove to the industry that their technology works. So I think the first thing you need is you need to partner up small tech companies with bigger companies as proof of concept. The organisation I'm working at the moment called Sizzle, we're developing some new composts which will replace peat. They're more sustainable. And what we've realised is actually the market is against us, that certain products that we need are more expensive because of legislation. So you need to change the legislative framework to help the startups succeed. And again, what we're doing there is we're bringing a whole group of organisations together to lobby government to change, to make it easier for these new technologies to exist. So the first thing I'd say, it's got to be collaborative. The second thing, I think, for any business is you have to take risks, if you're big business or small business. So two of the things that I did at Hubbub, which worked really well, one is a thing called Community Fridges, which redistributes food, which would have been wasted, perishable food, to anybody who wants it. We ran 7 experiments on cutting food waste in a tiny little Derbyshire town called Swadlincote. 6 of them were absolutely shit. one worked. Nobody remembers the shit ones. Everybody remembers the one that works. And similarly with the ballot box, which is a voting cigarette bin, which cuts cigarette littering. We did that in one street. Again, we tried 8 or 9 ideas, including naked bin men, don't even ask. But the one that worked was the ballot bin. So I think, you've got to be able to take risks and try things and be prepared to fail yourselves and not worry about it, because somewhere amongst that you will learn something and you'll start to evolve. And what the ballot bin showed was actually behaviour change and innovation doesn't have to be expensive. My motto at Hubbard was always fail fast, fail cheap, because you can learn something and you can move on quite quickly. And then the final thing would be a bit of a watch out, which is I do work for Tetra Pak on their global sustainability panel, helping them with their innovation. And they look at an idea and they really look at an idea and they really go into it and say, is this actually the most sustainable solution? So obviously we've seen a big uptick in vegan meals, but actually a lot of them are ultra processed food. And when you actually look at the environmental footprint of that vegan meal, is it that much better than the other alternatives? So vertical farming is another example where you look in the States, vertical farms, which are all the rage, had massive investment, don't make money, carbon footprint's high. AI, we've heard, could have a huge impact on carbon levels. So I think there's a real temptation in horizon scanning to jump at an idea without thinking about its full social implications, its health implications, its true environmental implications. And I think there's a lot of venture capitalists now starting to ask those questions, like, are we going to get burnt on this because this looks like it could be great now, but actually when you look at almond milk, for example, is that really that much better? So I think the watch out is, if you're going into innovation, look at it holistically to decide whether it is the best way forward.
Thanks very much, Trewin. That's a really nice sort of setup for the rest of the discussion. I see there's nothing appearing on Slido in front of me. I don't know if you've been posting things on Slido, audience. Stick your hand up if you have been, because it may just not be showing, or maybe you've all been blown away by it. We got one there, great. So do follow up with some questions on Slido while I ask a couple of my own, and I think it's been, True, and you sort of set it up really well. A specific question and then into a more general one. How do we avoid, I can't remember the man's name now, but he managed to invent not one but 2 environmental hazards while trying to make the world a better place. He was the guy who put lead in petrol and the guy who invented CFCs. And at the time he thought he was doing the planet and people a huge service. How do we, picking up on Trewin's sort of challenge, how do we avoid falling into that kind of trap, given the urgency with which we need to develop these solutions? Given we need almost that sort of .com enthusiasm, fail once, fail faster, How do we avoid falling into that trap? And perhaps more widely on from there, how do we incentivize the right kind of risk taking to get these things towards the market quickly enough to make a difference in the time that we have available to do that? Anybody?
I'll jump in. Oh God, I gotta stop doing that. So I think it's. I didn't know there was one poor soul who'd invented CFCs and lead in petrol. But I do think there is a real tension, because if we sort of wait to sort of pressure test and LCA everything to death, then we'll be here for, sort of decades, and we haven't got decades. We've got a matter of years. What are we going to get emissions down by 30-40% by 2030? Equally, I agree, just jumping in with both feet and having a sort of screw it, let's do it mentality can lead us into some very, very difficult places. And I think you have to think it through. I think be led by science at speed, maybe. Certainly when we were working with F1, we very quickly had to move from don't use biofuels. There's all sorts of issues with biofuels. There's the right type and the wrong type, and then eventually we got to synthetic fuels, because that was the one which actually they looked at and said, well, if we do that, and I know I've got an expert on this on my left, but if we generate the power renewably and then we split carbon dioxide and we turn it into a fuel and it cycles through it, then it's probably not impossible to hit fault with that, but certainly rather than jumping straight to stuff made out of vegetable oil or something, which, you know, is already getting a bit of a smell around it. That sounded like a food pun. You know, I was reading the other day about sustainable aviation fuel, and now there's, you know, there are links back to the large-scale meat industry, because a lot of it comes from pig rendering and things. So I think maybe science at speed, which would make scientists wince, but I do think run the numbers first. Best I got.
Anybody else got thoughts on that?
Scientists at speed, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, how do we get science at speed? What do we need?
I know
to
I'm
do?
currently working with someone. They're having an argument over who's going to be first author in a paper, and it's less about the impact on the ground. But yeah, it's about pushing forward. It's changing the way universities actually work. If you are dealing with academics there, and their, you know, their whole impact, you know, they get impact for not startups. It's about writing research papers. So that needs to be changed. The way that universities are controlling the IP in this country. You know, when we did some research, it said, you know, up to 60% intellectual property for multiple co-founders. What's the point in America? So it's about pushing this forward, as you said, trying those experiments and just looking at the bigger system. You know, there's no such thing as a sustainable product, but there's a sustainable product system. So start looking at it that way. Because, you know, who's the guy that came up with polylactic acid? Because PLA sounds great, it's bio-based, but it clogs up both the recycling and the composting systems at the same time, because nobody knows where to put it. So you kind of do the hope cycling. You know, let's see where it lands. Or you do an experiment, stick it in your garden, and it's still there in 20 years' time. So it's those kind of things. Really start thinking about the long-term impacts. And back to what we were talking earlier, is just understanding where some things do actually, you know, plastics are amazing material. We're still going to use them. You know, we can't get rid of them straight away, because how are we going to send tweets or X's, whatever John's doing at the moment? You know, these kind of things. So understand that, yeah, storing carbon and those kind of things as well. It's not the best, but it's something. It's trying something different and see what happens. Yes, I'm a Formula One fan as well, although I get less said about Red Bull, the better. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you guys a question I asked a previous panel before lunch. Given that it's at least plausible that we'll have a new, significantly different, I hope, government in power in a year's time, what would be your wish list that they could do to help drive the sort of innovations we want, help them happen faster, help them happen in a way that's consistent with the rest of the stuff we need to achieve in terms of tackling climate change, biodiversity crisis, etc., etc.?
Well, I think as a very young company that, you know, needs money in order to make this move forward. You don't become profitable straight away when you do these things, especially in the sustainable market. The Innovate grant that we got was fabulous, and we got an immense amount of money. We had to stump up 30% of it, and which in itself just makes it inaccessible. There's another grant that they give, an RTO. It's only £15,000, but you have to pay that up front. So I think if you can write a report and it's valid, and they can see that, willing enough to give you money, that perhaps they should make it slightly less difficult or costly to help us move things forward. So it does seem that you come up against barriers the whole time. And admittedly, the UK has got it's great support for companies to have a go and get going, but that support to help you move over the barriers that are the financial barriers that are in front of you is not always there, I'd say. So that's something that could really be helpful.
True.
So I think there are sort of two big things that governments can do. I mean, I think the first is to talk about a just transition, because, you know, we are going through, you know, if we just call it the next revolution after the agricultural industrial revolution, is this the next one? And in any period of that extensive change, there are winners and losers. And I think the role of government is to make sure there's a safety net for the losers. So if you look at what the French are doing at the moment, for example, in terms of sort of scrappage schemes for cars, you know, a shift in the way that they're financing the transition, so that those on a low income or those who are going to be adversely affected don't get heavily penalised. I think that's one thing government absolutely must do. I think the second thing is, unfortunately, it's now become a political issue, hasn't it, in the UK? And we've got to take that out of it, and that, you know, this needs to be a conversation about, do you want a future where, You know, we have cleaner rivers, cleaner air, you know, all the things that we inherently want has somehow got lost in this 7 bins. You've got to go to this shop, net zero sort of bollocks, basically. And I think that is actually hindering the risks that many organizations are taking, because they know that if they start heading down that route, they're going to get sort of hammered by certain parts of the vocal minority. So I think we've got to get rid of that culture. We've got to have a just transition, and then we have absolutely got to fund those high startup costs that you're going to face when you're trying to shift any system, and that should be transition funding.
That's nice.
By the way, first of all, I'm glad you share my conviction that we Lib Dems are about to storm back to power. That's great to hear. I think tax and subsidies as well. We know that tax changes behaviour, and whilst I remain unconvinced that a sort of 1% benefit in kind on EVs leading to people buying lithium-crammed 2.5-ton Telstra tractors is a good thing, it's certainly working in terms of getting people to buy them. So I think tax and how you use it, and also subsidies. I mean, we're still subsidising fossil fuels. It's crackers, and it needs to stop.
Yeah. Got an interesting, quite challenging question here, because when we talk about innovations, we're always talking about the key thing is to take them to scale, make them replicable, take them to scale quickly. And Anonymous, who's been very active today, Anonymous has asked us, what do you think of searching for more local, unscalable solutions? Do local unscalable solutions, in other words, people just getting on with something that works for their locality, they have a role? Do we get too excited by everything's got to be mega?
I think once again, going back to insect protein, there's no reason why that can't happen. Why you can't do it locally. And one of the things that we're researching at the moment is trying to find different feeds that can be sourced locally, and whether that be a seaweed or whether that be something that those plants that are growing in the river because of global warming, and use those as a feed. And that way it would allow you to create your own insect protein that you could turn into a powder that can be stored. It's all environmentally sound, uses far less resources, and why wouldn't you? So yes, there's a place there already. It doesn't need to be mega.
So sort of scaling by having lots of different local...
Yeah, but at the end of the day, what you need to do is regulate it. And you need to say, we can do that, we can use this feed, we can use this feed, and it has no impact on the quality of the protein. Yeah. So these studies need to happen, and insect protein is so young that we don't know these answers yet.
Yeah.
So once again, this is part of supporting it, so we can find out the solutions, so that we can create things like that in the future.
We got a nice, slightly sceptical one, picking up really on what Trewin was saying, from Jonathan Malyon, saying, can governments really do anything? 4 years of power, 2 of realistic influence. He says, not allowing enough time to create generational change. What needs to change? I mean, we've had attempts at the consensus, cross-party consensus with the Climate Change Act, for example. I mean, slightly picking up on what you said, Trewin, and anyone else. Could we have a Just Transition Act? Is that ridiculously optimistic? Something which there's some kind of consensus between the main parties. Is anyone else doing this? I think there's talk of some people that you referred to, the Parisians, talking about what it'd be like to live in a 50-degree Paris, looking ahead on a more consensual basis in government elsewhere.
Wow. I mean, at the moment, sitting here in the UK, that seems like a very distant sort of dream. But what I think I've seen is that many of the companies that can create significant rapid change operate globally. And actually, they are looking, so for example, in the fashion industry, they're looking at what's happening in California. They're looking at the legislation that's coming through in France. They're then thinking, where's that going to go next? Is it going to go to Europe? Is it then going to go to China? And I think what companies are looking at is the most progressive governments and thinking, blimey, if they're doing that now, who's going to follow? And how quickly do we have to change our systems to meet it? So the work I do with Tetra Pak, they're really looking at some of the legislation around packaging, for example, from some of the more progressive governments. And they're almost saying, that's actually the standard we need to get to, because sooner or later the rest will follow. And if we don't follow that, then we're going to get hit by a massive bill, because we have to change our systems very quickly and very late. So I think progressive, the Scottish government or the Welsh government doing amazing things can have a much bigger impact than you'd probably expect.
I think I have maybe not a view on the UK government since I'm not from here, but I can tell you that it's just as messy in the EU. It's just as messy in Switzerland, but I think we have to be positive there. I am always positively surprised about the climate strategies that a lot of the government have, and they have really tangible actions in there and tangible goals. And I think a lot of us, even those in the industry, don't even know about them. And the EU is in hefty discussions to put up regulations for all kind of markets. What we know, though, is that this will take time. So keep pushing our governments, keep asking more from them. They're moving forward. Regulation takes time. What is the other part of it? That's the private market. And I think that's something that we also need to discuss, is that is really can be and should be the fuel, the driver of such innovation. And I know it's really difficult for companies to come and to say, where should we invest? Where should we take action in climate? Because there's such a broad range of sectors and companies. But this voluntary private market is where we see at the moment, the most drive coming. And that's fantastic, right? Even though sometimes it is criticized, and I'm sure we'll go into the topic of what is greenwashing, but you know, you can see it as a huge positive catalyzer.
Yeah. Another question here about investors. What about the role of private investors? What more can investors be doing to support startups and solutions in this space? And I suppose it's partly a question: are investors, are their eyes open enough to the potential of such solutions? But also, how can the investment framework be adapted through regulation or whatever in order to make it more appealing to investors? And you think of the quite extraordinary tax breaks that the government gave to fossil fuel companies post-Ukraine war, 120%, whatever it was, which doesn't tend to be available to sustainability startups, to put it mildly. Are there thoughts on this investment community role of?
I think it's actually something supporting the startups, not just for the money, but the knowledge and experience as well, that kind of thing. And also, something's just turning around and telling the startups, don't go for the big money straight away. Trying to avoid some of the venture capital money that may not want to grow this company more than the fact they're just selling on at the next stage. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with that. And really, to tie some of the questions in together, it's really interesting seeing what's happening in Yorkshire. It's where I'm based, and actually they've set up Bio Yorkshire to make it a net zero area, and you're seeing things popping up like Circular Malton to look at community investments as well. Up there we've got various universities coming together to actually invest in their intellectual property. So what we're seeing now as well, so sorry if this is tying questions together, it's about people talking and understanding that, seeing the value of things working. For universities, invest in their own research to kind of commercialize and help them build it forward and give them that actual things they need, whether it's the marketing, whether it's the CEO, whether it's help them build advisory boards. But there's a lot more green angels out there, and green VCs. There's a lot more money. There's a lot more family offices as well. Even sovereign wealth funds doing things a lot differently now as well. And I think people are actually opening up to this, especially when they're seeing various other companies that are doing things more on the sustainability side.
Yeah.
I think something else with that is it's similar to the SEIS scheme, which is a fabulous investment scheme, for young companies. It mitigates the risk, and if you do make money investing in a small company, you don't get taxed on the profits. And if they did something along those lines with, for instance, sustainability, with those kind of businesses, then I think would incentivize investors to put their money into those kind of businesses and help grow that market.
We got more Slido question. It's all has to be on Slido, I'm afraid, because we're being streamed online, so it all has to come through here. Sorry, we won't be see people online won't be able to hear you, and I'm afraid in the room we probably won't. I'm sorry. That's why I'm told we have to use Slido. Can we scroll up the Slido questions? I'm trying to focus on those that are really covering the horizon scanning side of things. I know there's more ones if we scroll up or scroll down. I think there were more coming in. Maybe not. Well, let's take this one. I'm not quite sure how it relates directly to horizon scanning, but quite interesting. What innovative things can businesses do to help their local communities? Particularly if you think of perhaps help their local communities who are starting to do some of these local unscalable solutions that we were talking about earlier and that Connell referred to. Is there any thoughts on that?
I mean, you see a lot of things through, food donations as well. You've got the company shop set up in Yorkshire, where they're actually, sometimes they buy the stuff off the supermarkets. Quite often they're donated, and actually then they're setting up these local community cafes and actually seeing how people then at each place is doing something differently. It ties into other projects like that around food waste, and I think that's really, really useful. Other things is upskilling people about offering tools as a service, community lending. Obviously you got to do that bespoke, because you don't want to lend everybody a ladder, because if they're a burglar or whatever else, But I really think businesses can offer back. I mean, I quite like various initiatives. I spoke to a chap the other day doing something where they support local businesses through you learn about sustainability for £5 a month, and they teach about carbon credits and with the negative things like carbon literacy and all these kind of things as well. You've got 1% for the planet, but if we can do that in a local area as well, I think that's very, very important.
True.
There was a great report came out last week by an organisation called Pilot Light, and basically they'd asked all of the small heroines in communities who are doing stuff on climate change, what help would they most like from businesses, and top of the list was guidance on marketing and telling their story better. And then there was a whole list of things. I mean, I think rather alarmingly, there were 16,000 environmental charities in the UK, and I think that immediately sets out one of the big problems, is that they're sort of, it's like the today's national, like it was in Monty Python, that everybody's got a slightly different view on how to say the butterfly and the different types of meadows. So it's a very confusing picture. So for a business to try and work out which is the good ones and which are the valid ones, it's complicated. But if a business is looking to help environmental organisations, I'd really recommend having a look at the Pilot Light report, because actually money wasn't top of the list. It was help with skills, capacity building, knowledge, and I think that's where my start point would be for a company.
Nice question here. Sort of picking up on something we said at the start, saying it's not always about innovation. Sometimes looking at what we need, what we used to do before the take, make, waste mentality, e.g. fix and make do, sharing economy, etc. I mean, have we forgotten some of the basics in our search for shiny new innovations? Forgotten some of the basics that would actually help us get out of the hole that maybe our parents, grandparents, whatever, did without thinking?
I'm really glad you saw that one. I think it's a great question. I mean, I purposely led with innovation, and I am a bit of an innovation junkie, but I actually think this is incredibly important. And I think what we need to understand is what are the barriers to it. So I'm going to do an unashamed plug for my wife's startup, which is around used skiwear, because skiwear lasts forever. It's terribly difficult to recycle, and it should be easy to pass on. So they have a peer-to-peer skiwear. Sorry, I won't mention the names. It's not a plug. I think the point being that
BBC,
I think the interesting thing, it's called whoski.com. But the point is, I think, is we need to bring innovation to make it easy for people, because when they went out to people and said, would you like to recycle your skiwear or sell your skiwear, then yes, I would. And they said, why not? Well, it's too much effort. It takes a lot of time. I've got to bag it up. I've got to take it to the post office, blah, blah, blah. The will is absolutely there. I think people love right to repair, and I think people love sharing, reselling stuff, but they're very time poor. They're very pressured. And so what I would say is it is the purest and best form of reducing impact. And I think we should get in behind it. I guess without wishing to sound too sort of glib or trite, if we can bring really clever innovation around behavior change and around technology to make it easy, that's what we need, because I don't think people really can find the time that easily. So I think it's so important. It's something Druin knows more about than I do, but I think we've got to make it easy, and maybe innovation has a role to play in that. But we shouldn't forget it, because boy, do we ever waste a lot of shit.
True, and then Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing work with the horticultural sector, trying to phase out peat.
Druin, can you hold the mic a bit?
Oh, sorry, trying to phase out peat, because obviously peat is an incredibly important carbon sink, and the horticultural industry just relies on peat for its growing. And then somebody pointed out to me, actually, 50 years ago, the horticultural sector didn't use peat. And actually, peat only started to be used when somebody invented the plastic plant pot, because then it was easy to put peat into a plant pot and sell the whole plant. Before, they just used to sell the plant, not even in the soil, when you could just go and plant it out. And then they used other materials instead of peat. So actually, in that instance, plastic pots came along, peat came along, and the industry is now saying, oh, we can't move away from it. But actually, they did previously, and they've now got to relearn all of those old skills and the old way of operating. So sometimes in our haste for progress, we move into areas where we're creating more damage. So relearning some of those old skills, I think, is really important.
Yeah. And go on, Richard. Yeah, Richard. Well, I was just going to say, do any sort of come to mind now that would be, a low-hanging fruit type of old skill to relearn? Use the peat example, obviously. Are there other ones that come to mind?
Well, I mean, there are loads, aren't there? I mean, I almost called it like heritage with a twist. And if you look at what's becoming popular, like Strictly is, that's an old skill that's come back and it's been reinvented, hasn't it? And sowing bees, so that's we have this love of heritage, but we like to put a modern day twist on it. And I think there's stuff the sustainability movement can do around that, because food waste, we know a lot of food waste is driven because people have lost some cooking skills. They don't know when food's gone off. You've obviously got the repair side of things around electronics. It's interesting, the repair shop is really popular. So can we use this sort of obvious cultural desire to relearn those skills as part of, a sustainability revolution? And if we do that, can we do it in a way that takes away some of the stigma and the negative feelings that people have about, a greener future is about giving up? And actually it's not. It's about bringing back skills and heritage that we've had previously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for that. I mean, we were recently working with homewares retail and looking at various initiatives from take back to repairing. And a lot of the time we're looking at, community repair cafes. I don't know if anyone knows any nearby you, and it's great. You not only get people who know how to fix things, generally the older generation retired, and then learn, teaching people new skills as well. They might spend most of the time on YouTube. We're looking at all these videos out there repairing cars, windows. I wouldn't want to show people how to slow down at a zebra crossing, but I think I'm probably screwed with that one. But it's really interesting. A lot of people like sharing these. There's not a stigma about it these days. It's about kind of making your clothing unique to yourselves, or buying second hand. I even buy my shoes second hand. You can buy everything as second hand. Just don't go down the underwear route on the internet. Although my wife did tell me that one of her friends paid off her student loan by selling her underwear, but we can discuss that later. But these kind of things, you can just look into the different materials, and then, yes, there's been a lot of stigma with a lot of brands like H&M, where they're conscious to collection. A lot of it's just been ending up, in rubbish dumps in certain parts of the world. But actually, there are people out there that can use these things and start, partly, the repair cafe, the clothing, just.
Could you scroll back up the slide? We lost a couple of questions at the top that I was just going to come to, because I think it's very interesting. One of them from Jack. Here we are. We've got it here. How are you, or how should we all challenge already successful businesses to horizon scan? And he said here, what is their motivation outside of social good? Well, presumably part of their motivation is to latch onto the next big opportunity. But are there ways in which we should be challenging business to be looking out that horizon more? Anybody? Matt?
I think two techniques. Don't tell them we do this, because they'll be really. Instilling a creeping sense of unease is always quite good. Which is, look, you know what's coming, but if it did, what would you do? And I think that is actually a pretty good tool. I don't think of what to say just because paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. But I think seriously, we do say to people, look, just imagine if this scenario played out. What would you do about it? So, and not just with an angle on the fear, because the other thing I was going to say is competitive advantage. And really think radically about, what it would work. And I think Trone's point about vertical farming was well made. It's I think it's got some way to go before it works. But if you could find out that you could produce something with a very low carbon footprint at the fraction of the price, and you took the big plunge and divorced production from land use, and you thought that you could steal a march in your competition, then you could go for it. So I think it's yeah, like I said, creeping our knees and competitive advantage are two things which motivate business quite well. I spent 25 years actually in the sort of commercial end of business, and they both work for me.
The carrot and the stick. Yeah. A nice question here about we provided quite a lot of examples of horizon scanning in technology innovation. What about horizon scanning in areas like community engagement, staff well-being? Do we see enough of that in organisations, maybe in government as well?
No.
Why?
I think the whole community engagement piece is super interesting, and if anybody was in the partnership session earlier, there were some really good examples of where businesses had truly got to grips with the local needs of the area and had built very constructive long-term sustainable partnerships with community organisations. And I've worked with businesses where I worked with a factory in Gloucestershire where basically the factory was the employer in that village in Gloucestershire as a food manufacturer, and they had no engagement at all with their local community, even though most of the local community worked in the factory. And it was such a missed opportunity for them to maximise both their relationships in the area, probably to improve the employees' feelings towards the company, probably to improve the well-being of that community. So I think there are some shiny examples where it does happen, but I don't see a lot of communities businesses really truly getting embedded into their local community and acting as like the catalyst for great change in their area. Yeah.
We've got one here about, do businesses need to change the way they talk to each other and their competitors in adopting new technologies stroke innovations? I mean, do we need more pre-competitive collaboration perhaps when looking at, particularly promising but probably quite costly and far-flung opportunities? Any thoughts on that, anyone?
I mean, obviously, working in an ecosystem can only benefit each other, but at the end of the day, I'm with you. I think the competitive or the competition in that sense is what brings also kind of the movement forward, right? If one company starts being the first mover, then the others want to go, and that's the great thing about that private market, that we drive each other forward by doing that. But I'm sure there are lots of other examples that forming partnerships will make it even stronger together. I mean,
yes, we need to get a better word, though. The one that was phrased, word coopetition. That really is the first one you score out in business bullshit bingo. But no, you see that, the key example there is a smartphone is, Apple and Samsung work together, car manufacturers, then Apple and Samsung sue each other over, IP issues and something else. But kind of looking at working together, dealing with waste, especially, from the tech side of things, really needs to happen, because, then at scale you can have other people working and doing that as well.
We have a problem with that, though, of course, is that, company valuations considers IP to a great degree. So if you're then sharing that with other people, then you've diluted your investability. So you cause a problem.
Yeah. We've got a question here about what do we see in terms of nature-based opportunities coming down the line, as opposed to ultra-processed GMOs, etc., which feels like opening Pandora's box. A question from Sue. So interesting nature-based innovations. What do we see coming down the line on that?
Insect protein.
What I saw the other day, which I found really interesting, was now a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Enhanced photosynthesis. Has anybody been following this? It's absolutely astonishing how you can actually increase plants' growth rate. And I must admit, I immediately turned to, well, clearly they'll have to splice a gene in from a sort of pig and something else to do it, and it'll be reliant upon genetic modification. I think some of the early versions were. Some of the latest versions are involving some sort of nanotechnology. Even that sounds scary, doesn't it? But actually, it is transformational. If you can increase plants' growth rate by something like 20% without using GM, it could be an astonishing breakthrough. So, it is I think there's undoubtedly, there is a big law of unintended consequences around some nature-based solutions, but I think enhanced photosynthesis seems to me is one which is really exciting, but I don't understand the science, I'll be honest.
Can I?
Richard probably does.
Can I scare people a bit?
Yeah, please do.
So I got this information from a man called Johan Rockström, who works at the Boston Institute. It's one of the leading carbon measurers in the world. And he said that every single scenario towards 1.52 degrees, etc., is based on the fact that nature will take out about 25% of the carbon emissions. And every single scenario works on that assumption. But actually, nature is in panic mode. So nature is taking out 25% because it feels it has to, and it doesn't normally do that. And if you reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, the chances are that nature eventually will stop taking out that 25%. But every single scenario on 1.5 is based on that assumption that we get a free hit from nature for 25%. So if you think about that, that means that we've got to have better nature-based solutions. And then we also had a brilliant presentation from an American academic saying, okay, how do you progress with that? And his view was, backed up with a lot of evidence, is that we cannot put any more land into agriculture than we have at the moment. So we cannot increase the amount of land we have in agriculture, but we have a bigger population to feed. So basically we need an intensification of agriculture, which goes against many of the principles that we're seeing around agriculture at the moment. So you've got to get the most innovation out of land use and grow the right things in the right place and shift diets. So those are the sort of like two scary numbers. And if you think about that and you think about where businesses have got to head, nature-based solutions have to be absolutely intrinsic within your carbon strategy. And what I think we've seen today is that businesses have looked at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. They sort of understand that. They've started to put policies in place, but what they haven't really got to grips with is what the nature-based piece is in that. So in terms of sort of future scanning, I think what we're going to see is more businesses understanding that, governments understanding that, and we're going to see a lot more innovation around better farming, better use of land, and making sure that we can keep that carbon target on track through nature solutions.
Richard, then Sophie.
Yeah, one of the areas that really interests me at the moment, so we're working with fishing communities in Kerala and India, is actually the blue economy and value there. So we're one, it's about women's rights in the fishing communities, and also how they can adapt to climate and any other massive black swans like COVID coming up again. But what we're doing is we're tracking the fishing boats and then seeing where they're catching more fish as a means to then find ways that we can actually create money for them, say planting sea kelp or sea grasses or coastal remediation strategies through mangroves as well. And we're looking into all of this, and I'm trying to tie that up to the project we're doing in Madagascar, where we're actually, so you could use Christmas trees as an energy source. Sounds weird, but pine needles.
Madagascar. Sorry, just talk us through.
Well, because there's a lot of the land has been sold off Madagascar for industrial farming, for tree plantations, and the locals are sadly going and burning it down because they need wood for making charcoal, so they can heat and make materials and things like that. Yep. And so, working with an NGO in India, they've been doing this for a while, and actually collecting pine needles reduces the fire risk on the ground, because pine needles, when they dry, they become highly flammable. But you can also run these through pyrolysis, so low oxygen, high heat. It creates gas, which you can then create community energy, and output charcoal, which is also, biochar as well, which we could look into. Is there a carbon credit market there? But that's not a way. But we're looking into how do we fund this? Is it funded through the landowners who own the plantations, because then they're getting reduced risk? The communities are coming, collecting the pine needles to actually power the community energy as well, and then it's reducing the risk of fire breaking out. So it could be the landowners, it could be insurance companies is paying. So we're looking at all these different waste streams, and you could do that around the world. You could use excess seaweed that's not going into packaging. You could use anything else that's lying around to then turn this into an energy source at a community level. And because I'm hungry as well, I was thinking about as well, there's another related to fermentation. There's a company called Win-Win Food Labs, if anyone's heard of them. So the chap works in fermentation, did his PhD at Oxford, went home to his parents and thought he smelled chocolate, but actually it wasn't, it was potatoes rotting. And from that, he looked to that, and now they make a cocoa-free chocolate, which also can be linked into pet food as well. I'll connect you with them later. And it's really, really interesting. So he's exploring lots of different ways of fermentation for making foods. So there's a whole area you could open up there, from Christmas trees, dog food, chocolate, and seaweed. There's an interesting Heston Blumenthal dish later on. Yeah.
Sophie, you wanted to come in?
I mean, I might have at the same time a bit of a surprising but also kind of boring take on the whole nature-based thing. Surprising because I'm the representative from a climate tech, so you might think tech all the way. Boring because I'll be a good Swiss and be very neutral and say we need a bit of all of it. We can't find a solution by doing only tech. We can't find a solution by doing only nature. If you look at the carbon removal market, we have nature-based solutions. Those are called trees, for example. They remove carbon from the atmosphere. But we cannot just plant trees all over the world and that's enough to remove the carbon from the air. Also, trees are not permanent. Unfortunately, they can burn down. Right. So for sure, we need those kind of solutions, and we need also kind of hybrid solutions that say, how can we take natural processes and accelerate them? But we need also to use the developments that we've had and technology to move things forward. And then maybe the third part is, let's go back to the roots and say, how can we stop this always more and more kind of consuming and producing trends, but that's a whole other topic,
It is, but just sort of picking up on something Tryggvan said near the end there about we cannot put any more land under agriculture. We absolutely cannot do that. Is one of the sort of innovations that we need to adopt is challenging ourselves as environmentalists, speaking loosely, of changing our mindsets around what we need to do, what's natural. I'm thinking of how George Monbiot upset quite a lot of people by basically having a go at organic agriculture and saying organic agriculture cannot feed the world. We've only been able to feed the world through agricultural intensification. Now we've got to do it differently through fermented bacteria, etc. Are there ways in which we as environmentalists need to change our minds as to what we actually see as sustainable? Is that part of the innovation shift that has to happen?
Yeah, I think somewhere between sort of techno-panacea and returning to an agrarian past is probably where we need to be. And I think it is true. I think that we do need to challenge our thinking because the reality is, I know George Monbiot got a lot of flack for that, but organic agriculture does deliver lower yields. Now, if we all switch to a plant-based diet, then maybe it could work, but I'm not sure we're going to. And I think there are big debates which need to be had. Land sparing versus land sharing is a debate we have to have, and because a lot of work's been done on regenerative and on organic agriculture, but it's generally.
Do you just want to explain to people what land sparing versus
land sharing? Yeah, land sparing and land sharing, and Tryggvan, you probably know a little bit more than this about me. About me than this, but it's essentially saying land sharing is when you start to infiltrate more nature into natural environments. So you start to share it with nature, more hedgerows, more sort of more animals and so on and so forth. Now, the effect of that is it does increase biodiversity, it does increase carbon sequestration, but it probably comes at a cost to yields and productivity. Land sparing, if I've got the two the right way around, is essentially when you say, look, I'm going to intensify agriculture on a smaller area of land, and the rest I'm going to give over to nature. And boy, does it ever kick off a debate. But we have to have, these debates. We probably do have to have a debate about whether large lithium-crowned electric vehicles being bought by everybody is a better route to decarbonising than moving to synthetic fuels. We do need to have these debates around it. And again, you do need to be led by the science. But I think there's a sort of intuitive desire we all have for something which is nice, which I suspect is not always the best way to get to where we want. Really, I mean, surfactants in shampoos and things like that. I have a creeping suspicion that using vast areas of what was rainforest to create palm oil to turn into surfactants might not be as good a solution as making synthetic ones which are biodegradable in a lab. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but I do hear it from a lot of people saying that presuming that the natural route is the best one for nature is the right one. So I think we need led by the science. So I probably offended roughly half the room and delighted the other half, but hey, we'll go with that. But I think we have to have the debates.
I can upset the other half. So I think it's. I mean, the whole agriculture debate is really interesting. So if you're thinking about using land for the best possible purpose, I'm slightly biased. I did go over to Ireland and I met a load of farmers in Ireland, beef farmers. And Ireland has now got a carbon target, and obviously beef farming is being heavily criticised because it creates a lot of carbon in Ireland. But actually, if you think about it, if we are going to eat beef, the best place to produce high quality, low carbon beef is on family farms in Ireland. Ireland shouldn't be penalising those farmers for producing something which globally is actually a good thing, because actually food miles is a very limited part of the whole sort of carbon footprint of food. So we have this thing about, oh, it's all got to be local and it's food miles. And I think that's a debate that needs to be debunked. And it started because environmentalists, before the science came on, wanted the nice thing, which was, oh yeah, all local food from the local area. But actually, if you look at the whole carbon picture, that might not be the best way to do it. And there's countless other debates around, should we be replacing natural products with plastic things because they're not animal based when they've got microplastics. So I think as the science evolves, a lot of the nice things that environmentalists like to say could actually prove not to be the right answer.
We've got about 2 minutes left. We've got a couple of questions about EVs. Just invite you to see if you want to take it. Just to sort of, one question says, do EVs become unviable, uninvestable if government keep moving targets? I think we can say, well, it makes it a lot harder. I think everyone would agree with that. Probably not entirely unviable. But question about the tipping point. Somebody says I assume they mean hydrocarbon fuels and electric vehicles, how you can make electric vehicles sustainable in terms of all the infrastructure issues, all the mining issues, etc. Does anyone have a quick take on, bearing in mind what Matt said about Formula One, quick take on viability of EVs as opposed to alternative fuel powered vehicles?
I've been gabbing on about cars enough, so let's
give us a quick answer, Matt, or Trin, because you
well, EVs are like, this is the answer, is EVs. The answer is more active, more travel. That's the answer. We need to have, we need to have something like 15-minute cities where people can get around and walk more and use better public transport and cycle more. That's a sustainable transport network. And what we're actually doing is we're encouraging people to buy incredibly heavy EVs, to drive a lot. When you push the brakes on an EV, you burn the tyres out, you get microplastics from the tyres, which are a huge impact. You've then got all the issues about lithium, etc., etc. So EVs are part of the transition, but they're not the first point you should be going for a sustainable transport policy. Your first point should be, let's have as active a transport policy as possible, as localised as possible. Let's have really great public transport links, and then perhaps have EV as the next part of it.
I would agree with all of that, but I think on the sort of moving goalpost, no, it doesn't help moving goalposts, I'm not entirely convinced. When I look at the scale and size of the EVs I'm seeing coming on the road now, I'm not sure that they are the right route to decarbonise transport for everybody and in every situation. But what people do need is certainty. So I think what you should actually, the Institute of Mechanical Engineers does a lot of work on the true well-to-wheel emissions, and you should essentially be led by the lowest carbon well-to-wheel solution, and that might differ from place to place, but you need to come up with a set of guidance and stick to it, because otherwise you're not going to get the investment in the new technologies.
Which is a very nice note to round off on. This is the last of our breakout sessions. For the rest of the day we'll be in here. We've got a 15-minute interval before we have our next plenary, which will be Secrets from the C-Suite, which my colleague Louisa Harris will be chairing. So meanwhile, I thought it was absolutely fascinating discussion, a mixture of tech and behaviour and challenging a few preconceptions as well. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and please join me in thanking our panel. Thank you very much.